spoken from the pulpit for weeks or months or years. There are a lot of people that rely on them. And they find the hypocrisy of what they're doing is just really wrenching them, really wrenching them. And of course, although in that small sample that we had, this wasn't the main issue. For some of them, they don't have any equity in a house. They've been living in a parsonage. They got 3 little kids. This is the only thing they know how to do. All of their friends are in the church. If they leave the church, their life is just going to be miserable. And in several cases, one of them, the one that really wrenched my heart was the one, and he was from a very literalist, sort of fundamentalist church. Said, my wife's parents didn't want us to get married. Said, he's not the right kind of Christian, and it's gonna tear her apart to learn this. Oh, another thing. These pastors, Linda was the first person in their lives who they'd ever talked to about this. In the same way that I found this when I was doing my, they said, I've never talked to anybody about this before. Well, these pastors, they haven't talked to their wives, they haven't talked to their superiors, heaven knows. They can't talk to their fellow ministers, even their good friends in the ministry, they don't dare. And so they're lonely, anxious, driven really into despair by their hypocrisy in some cases, and they can't get out. So we wrote up the first group and published it. One of the most interesting reactions, you can see it all, it's all on the web. The people who wrote, and these were church leaders and professors at seminaries and theological institutes and so forth, sort of big guns in religion. Most of them were quite angry. They weren't angry at us. They were angry at the ministers. And to me, it reminded me of nothing more than the anger that descends on the head of a magician who shows how a trick is done. The anger of his fellow magicians. That's a trade secret. You must not reveal that. And they came down like a ton of bricks on these poor people. Thank goodness they were all anonymous. Now, in the interim, 1 or 2 have gotten really brave and they've come out. And they've announced to the world that they were one of our, because we gave them all pseudonyms in the story. And one is doing okay, well, because he's a chaplain at a university, so he can sort of hang on to his job okay. Another one that's dropped out, but I'll tell you about another one in just a few minutes. Well, one of the things that we learned, that Linda learned when she was talking with these people, by the way, reading the transcripts, listening to the tapes, I haven't met any of these people. She does all the interviews. I am so impressed with her as an interviewer. Again and again, she'd ask questions. I would never have thought to ask that question. Perfect question. And she gets and deserves their trust. She probes. She's not taking any nonsense from them, but she's very gentle and she's very sympathetic. And even when, as in a few cases, she found them so blithely rationalizing. I mean, they've deceived themselves about what they're doing in a few cases, and it just sets your teeth on edge, but she handled it beautifully. But, interrupted myself. I forgot what point I was going to make about Linda. Oh yeah, one of the things that she began sending me emails about, and especially in the second study, is how many of these people, whether they are coming from a very literal church like Church of Christ or Baptist or Methodist, strong Methodist, or whether they're, you know, a Unitarian or an Episcopalian, they don't want to call themselves atheists. They are atheists. A few of them, yeah, okay, I'm an atheist. But they don't like the word, they don't want to call themselves atheists. So although the initial article we had was non-believing preachers who are not believers, instead of preachers who are atheists. This was interesting to us. Why is it just that the term is that hateful to so many people? Why don't they admit that basically what they are is an atheist? Well, this has become in itself an interesting thing, and that's one of the things that we're doing in phase 2. And I talked about this last week. Last weekend I was in Melbourne, Australia at the Global Atheist Convention, which was an amazing thing. Philosophers don't often get to talk to 4,000 people at once. It was quite an amazing scene. And I gave a talk, and it'll soon be on the web, called How to Tell If You're an Atheist. And I have a few slides here. I started by telling them about Anton syndrome, which is something that I've looked into in my other life as a researcher on the mind and the brain. Anton syndrome is so strange that some people find it hard to believe that it even exists. Here's what it is. It's a rare and extreme form of anosognosia, and that is when you have a deficit or a defect and you don't realize it. Your neglect is a very mild and familiar. There's lots of forms of anosognosia. But this is the grandpappy of them all, because this is otherwise known as blindness denial. These are people who, because of a cerebral accident, they've had a stroke or something, and although they were sighted yesterday, today they are blind, completely blind. They do not complain of being blind. They deny that they're blind. They're blind. It's hard to imagine that somebody could be blind and not know it, and not realize that they were blind. But it is possible, and the cases have been well studied. I myself have never interacted with an Anton syndrome patient. I've been reading about them and talking about them with friends for years, and I have a sort of standing order out to my friends who do work in this area. I said, call me up, email me the minute you get an Anton syndrome case. I'm on the next plane, because I've often had a chance to interact with people that had one strange and important kind of brain disorder, you know, blind sight, or other kinds. I used to do rounds at the hospitals here in the Boston area, and so I have a whole bunch of things I want to try out on an Anton syndrome person, but I haven't had the chance. It is rare, and the reason I'd get on the next plane is it also, as you might imagine, it doesn't last all that long. It might last a week or a month, but eventually the jig's up, and they come to realize that they're blind. Now, they're not stupid, they're not insane, they just don't realize that they're blind. And the reasons for that, well, it's an interesting story, but that's not what I'm going to talk about. Because what I wanted to talk about in Melbourne is a much more common affliction, atheism denial. My claim is that there are lots of people who are atheists and don't know it. And in fact, some of the reasons that they don't know it are very similar to the reasons why blindness denial people don't know it. It's too much of a shock to their system. And so this was what I wanted to talk about. So here's a picture of Linda, and this is the, you'll find this right on my website here at Tufts. We're now completing phase 2. Publication probably this calendar year, and thanks for the support. We have 2 main donors and 1 or 2 others, and we're going to need a lot of money. So if you know any donors that might be interested in contributing, we're going to, because phase 3 is in phase 3, we want to refine our questions and make a questionnaire that we can now do a mass mailing of, because we still have no idea of how big this phenomenon is, because all of our interviewees are self-selected. They get in touch with us. They all think they are the tip of the iceberg, that there's lots of others like them, but nobody knows them. They don't know. Interesting fact that it's been more than a year now that this has been out, and I've seen hundreds of commentaries and reactions from religious spokespeople to it. Nobody ever says, oh, they're making this up, this isn't a real problem. Everybody knows it's a real phenomenon. Everybody in every church knows that this is a real phenomenon. They just don't want people talking about it. So, some people think that maybe 80% of clergy are actually secret atheists. And some people think it might be 10% or 5%. And we don't know. It might be 5%. It might, I suppose, be 80%. Hard to say. But at any rate, when we recently ran this ad in the National Catholic Reporter, and so far it's not really helped all that much. But I want to draw your attention to one sentence in it. We didn't say who are atheists. We said deal with issues of mismatch between what they believe about God and faith and what their parishioners would expect them to believe. That's all it takes to set up the tension of hypocrisy. What they do, of course, is they develop, and believe me, they put a lot of time and energy into thinking it through. They develop ways of talking about their faith that they know their parishioners will accept and will interpret one way, and they can sort of have their fingers crossed behind their back and interpret them another way and convince themselves that they're not lying. We asked one of the ministers, Linda asked one of the ministers, well, fortunately she knows a lot about the liturgy and a lot of Protestant denominations. She said, well, you've got to say the creed every week from the pulpit. How do you do it? And he said, I do this. I say, let us now honor our forefathers who, when they prayed, said. So the whole thing's in quotation marks.